Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Caleb, and there's new reports and stuff going around about why Switch 2 is coming out this year, and of course this stuff has been going around for years now at this point, and people mostly believe 2024. I personally disagree, I think it's 2025, but this video isn't about why I think it's 2025. It's about looking at the evidence for 2024 and seeing if any of it makes sense, if it's valid, or if, in fact, it should just be disregarded. Now, I did make a video last year about, looking at just the facts, ignoring every rumor, but of course, we're not going to go into that. This video is going to be based on a video by Andre's Restart, which released last week, and of course, no shade to Andre's Restart. I do respect him, I do like his videos, I am subscribed, I watch his live streams every once in a while. So yeah, I do recommend go checking out his channel, but he did a good job compiling the best reasons why he thinks it's 2024. And so I have them here, and I sort of went in order and see, do these make sense, and my counterpoints. So, the first thing he said is about analysts and insiders. He basically said that every insider or analyst that has said anything about a release window for Switch 2 has said 2024. Now, I think he's probably right. I haven't seen any insider say 2025. However, it's worth noting that insiders are often wrong, because you gotta keep in mind, a lot of these insiders and analysts or whatever, everyone confirmed. Remember, Star Fox Grand Prix, oh yeah, that was a great game, I really loved that one, as well as the Switch Pro. Now, of course, everyone was saying Switch Pro around like June or so of 2021, and it never happened. And one particular insider that Andres mentions in this video is Dr. Sirkin Toto, and he even specifically says that he is never wrong, or that he's never been wrong, and that's just simply not true. First of all, he was wrong about Switch Pro, which of course everybody was, but, and someone might say, well, Switch Pro may have been real, but they had to re-change their schedule or whatever because of the chip shortage or something like that, and they ended up having to go with the OLED instead. And that might be real, that might be true, but that doesn't change the fact that they were wrong about the Switch Pro. The Switch Pro never came out. Another thing he was wrong about was Mario Kart 9 with a new twist. Remember that one? Yeah, the new twist being that Mario Kart 9 doesn't exist, unless you count Mario Kart Tour. But of course, a month after this quote-unquote, report came out, they announced the Booster Court Pass for Mario Kart 8. Maybe he was confusing it with that, but it doesn't matter because it wasn't Mario Kart 9 and it didn't have a new twist. Anyway, the next thing he goes into is these developer quotes, and I'll put them up on the screen. And this is basically from interviews about these certain developers, and they basically said, what are you excited for in 2024? And it shows the responses here from Capcom. 2024 will also bring new consoles and indie titles. And basically all these are saying, oh, there's new consoles coming out, or then there's rumors about a new Nintendo console. That's great. Okay, well, first of all, let's ignore the possibility of PS5 Pro and, the Xbox Brooklyn coming out, and let's just assume that these are all related to Switch 2, right? If there was an NDA, they obviously couldn't say anything specific about it. The only things they could say about it is, yeah, I've heard rumors about it, which is the same thing that everyone else has been saying. Of course, these developers would, if they were in development, especially Capcom, would probably have a dev kit, I would imagine, but they wouldn't be able to say anything about it. All they could say about it is stuff that anyone else already says about it. So this, in my opinion, doesn't mean anything. There's rumors of a new Switch, and I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of machine it will be. Yeah, of course there's rumors of a new Switch, everybody knows that. It's not news, and that's not really anything to report on. That's just someone's opinion about what they think might happen. Another thing is there was a GDC survey that came out, I think it was at the beginning of this year, but it was pulled last year, I think. And basically, it says, what platforms are you developing your current project for? And 8% of the respondents said the Nintendo Switch successor. So, and Andres makes a note that in 2017, the same survey, it was 3% saying Nintendo Switch. And the reason why, and he basically says that, okay, well, 3% Nintendo Switch in January 2017, when the console was already announced, versus 8% now, when it's not even announced yet, means that it's going to be a really high number. I would argue that's not true, because with the 2017 report, we already knew that the Switch existed. So, by that point, if you're saying, I'm working on a game for the Nintendo Switch, then that means that is confirmed. You have to say that you're working on a game for that console. because the console is already revealed. Right now, we're only in the speculation period, so anyone could say anything. It could be 8%. They could just say, oh, I have intentions, like Yacht Club. They're going to want Mina the Hollower on the Switch, or on the Switch 2, but they're not going to have a dev kit yet. They just say, oh, we intend to put it on the Switch 2, whenever we can get a dev kit, right? So that might be part of it, but like I said, you could say that for this. You could say, okay, we intend to do that, but for 3% in 2017, that means that you're expected to say, actually, factually, if you are working on a game for that console because it's been revealed. It hasn't been revealed yet. You can say whatever the hell you want. Anyway, next would be, I think his biggest point is the sales for Switch. And basically, his point is that we've had 3 years continuous downward sales, downward trajectory. So the sales has been lowering and lowering the sales numbers for the Switch console. And that's true. However, the software sales haven't been going down, and in fact, they've been going up. And of course, the home console, or the console only exists for the sake of selling the software. And at this point, few new people are going to have a Switch that don't already have one. So, and software's still selling extremely well. And of course, his point is that, okay, well, they're going to want to release it this fiscal year. And I agree. I think they will release it this fiscal year, or the next fiscal year, which ends in March of 2025. Because I think the console is going to release in March 2025. And he does mention this. He does say, okay, well, that's still the same fiscal year. However, if you're going to want more sales to say, okay, we sold 10 million units since September of 2024, versus saying we sold 3 million units at the end of the fiscal year, that's true. You could give a higher number. However, if you give a number for selling since September, then you already know the rate at which the console is selling, because you have a longer period that you can look at, so you know what rate the console is selling and how much to invest in the company. If you just tell your investors after you release it in March, we've completely sold out of all our stock, well, then there's no rate to give. It's just in hypothetical unlimited potential for sales. There's not a rate at which you can say, oh, we're selling at a rate of 15 million units per year. We're just saying, oh, we just sold out, just completely. What do you think sounds better to investors? I would argue if you release it in March and just say you sold out, I think that sounds better in general. Another thing he brings up, the next thing, is that is a pattern that he's noticed, and that there's never been more than 2 new Pokemon generations per console. And I haven't looked at it. I assume this is true. But it's also worth noting, I don't think that really matters, because the Switch is the most successful console that Nintendo's ever had, and if they do release a new generation for Pokemon, so what? They break that pattern for Pokemon games? I don't think they're basing the release on Pokemon on the release of the console. I think they're just saying, this is the current platform to support, put your game on it. Now, and he does bring in the fact that, if the new console comes out sooner, because of course Pokemon Company doesn't release their games on a brand new console. Like, if the next Pokemon game in 2025 will probably still come out on the Switch 1. But he's basically saying if you release the console sooner, then the Pokemon game will come sooner, and therefore you wouldn't have to have 3 new generations on a single console. Like I said, I don't really think that matters, so I think that's kind of a moot point. But anyway, moving on. He also mentions another pattern about Zelda games releasing between 1 and 1.5 years before the next console. So he mentions how Spirit Tracks released in 2009, and then less than a year and a half later, the 3DS came out. And of course, Skyward Sword in 2011, and then a year later, the Wii U came out. And of course, Tears of the Kingdom, if you do a year later, assuming that the Switch 2 is coming out this year, well, then the Switch 2 would come out. I don't think this matters at all. They're not saying, okay, let's wait a year and a year and a half to release our console after the next Zelda game. Like I said, it's the same thing with Pokemon. They're just going to release the game on the current platform, right? Or in the case of Twilight Princess, that game was going to come out in 2005, but then it got delayed and they put it on the Wii. Same thing with Breath of the Wild on the Switch. Like I said, I don't really think this matters. It's just, that's the current console that it's on. It just happens to line up that way. Right? Of course, if they're making 2 Zelda games for a console, then that console has probably lasted a while just because of the amount of time it takes to make a Zelda game. But anyway, the next thing is he mentioned this, and I think this is a pretty minor point. Switch 2 pre-orders have gone up on it's like Mecha Japan or something, some website. This means nothing. Completely, in my opinion, this absolutely means nothing. Because the same thing happened with the PS5, the same thing happened with the Nintendo Switch, the same thing happens with Metroid Prime 4 and on all these other games that are rumored or whatever. These companies always put up these like fake pre-order links for consoles that don't even exist or haven't been announced yet. This always happens, and people always report on it, and it always means nothing. It's the same thing as saying, oh look, Metroid Prime 4 says it's coming out December 31st, 2024. It must be true. No, they're just putting that up to attract attention to their website. It doesn't mean anything. And he does mention some Spanish retailers, quote-unquote, gearing up for Switch 2, and that, of course, this is just a rumor. I take no stock into it. It's just a rumor. And he's just from, I guess, a YouTube channel called Nintendo Leaks or something. It's a Spanish YouTube channel. I can't really look because I don't speak Spanish, but if you take that at face value, maybe. But that's just assuming that they're right about a rumor, and I don't really take stock into that. Another thing he mentions is the fact that he or one of his friends went to GameStop and asked them, when the Switch 2 is coming out, and they just said no comment. And let me just tell you, I did the exact same thing. I called a GameStop and asked them, and they just straight up gave me wrong information.
I heard there's a new Nintendo console releasing this year. I was wondering when you guys are going to have pre-orders up.
It's just rumors right now, so there's no confirmation through us.
Oh, so you guys don't know anything? You don't know when it's going to come out?
Nope, they've just announced that they're working on it. They haven't really said that it's actually going to come out this year or anything about it.
Oh, okay. I see.
So they basically just told me that the thing has already been announced, when in fact it hasn't. So GameStop knows absolutely nothing about the console, so I would not take any stock into that at all. The next point he makes is that he's saying that the Switch has an unusually long lifespan. Yeah, that's because it's successful. They're not going to cut off the console when it's successful. And the Wii U had an unusually short lifespan. What does that mean? It means that Wii U failed. Of course it did. The Virtual Boy had an unusually short lifespan. The Game Boy had an unusually long lifespan because it was successful. That's just how it goes. They're going to keep supporting it as long as the console keeps selling and as long as software keeps selling. That's just... It means nothing. And I remember people are saying, oh, the Switch 2 is going to come out in 2023 because that's 6 years. Because every successful home console from Nintendo lasts 6 years. But of course, that didn't happen. This means nothing. And then, of course, he mentions the unusual amount of remakes and remasters. And of course, we've had remakes and remasters this entire time for Switch. But, and I will give him this, for the future plans, the only first-party games that we know about so far is the Peach game, which comes out in March, and then Metroid Prime 4, which doesn't even have a year. So, yes, I'll give him that, but we haven't even had a Direct yet. And I would wager there's going to be new games in the Direct. So that ratio is going to completely dissolve, I predict, when the Direct comes out. And of course, his point is basically that, at the end of the lifespan, specifically around the 3DS, there was a lot of remakes and remasters. However, with the 3DS, a lot of those remakes and ports, those came out after the Switch was already out. Because remember, they supported the 3DS until 2019, which of course is 2 years after the Switch came out. So I don't even think we're in that same ballpark. And of course, the 3DS is different than the Switch, because, you could argue that the Switch is not the same type of demographic audience that the 3DS was, because they were treating the Switch as a home console. But regardless of that, that's basically the point, is that I don't think that matters. And that kind of boils down to all these points. I don't really think a lot of these matter, in the end. Another thing he mentions is Metroid Prime 4, the lack of news for it. And basically the point is that, okay, well, the game's probably done based on this LinkedIn profile because there's a game tester who's been testing the game for a long time, and that usually happens near the end of development to look out for bugs and things like that. And I agree the game is probably done, but I don't think the lack of them showing it means that it's going to be on Switch 2. I personally think the game's coming out this year and the Switch 2 isn't. I can get into why or whatever on another video, but I don't feel like diluting this video with the reasons why I think the Switch 2 is next year. So we're just going to go move on. The next thing he mentioned is the Nintendo Switch 1 trailer being taken down. And I think that's just because of the music that was in it. I think they used Imagine Dragons. So, yeah, and his point is basically that if they leave that trailer up, then if someone searches Nintendo Switch 2, that trailer might pop up, and then it'll confuse people who are trying to look up the new system. Well, what about all the re-uploads of that trailer? If you look it up, there'll be like a version from GameSpot. You're going to take that video down too? Well, they didn't. I don't really think that matters. And they didn't take down... there was some other thing. It's like they didn't take out the 3DS trailer or something when like the new 2DS came out or something like that. But basically, if you look at their previous consoles or previous games, those trailers weren't taken down. The old versions weren't taken down. If you look at the new Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe trailer, if you look up new Super Mario Bros. U trailer, you'll see the Wii U version. But of course, why come they didn't take that one down when the Deluxe version came out? Because it doesn't matter. The reason they took this trailer down is because of the music. So, I think that means nothing. Another thing, and I think this is actually a relatively good point, he said they rebranded the Nintendo Direct, and I'll put it up. Basically, starting last year, they put Nintendo Direct in the title of the Nintendo Directs, or Nintendo Switch in the title of Nintendo Directs, which is fair, you know, if they're gearing up for a new console. And he basically just says, well, if they're doing that, I don't think that they would do it such ahead of time compared to, like, if it started last year, it would make sense to him that would mean that the Switch 2 is coming this year, because they wouldn't do it so far in advance, because otherwise that would just be weird. And let me just say the same thing I've been saying this whole video. I don't think that matters. I do think them putting Nintendo Switch specifically in the title makes sense if you were trying to differentiate them. But gearing up does not mean that it's imminent, I would argue. Now, of course, all this we'll find out, but let's just move on. Okay, and this is kind of the big thing, and this is like a big thing that I don't really know why it's such a big deal for Switch 2 2024 believers. The colored button theory, and if you're unaware, basically there are some new games that came out last year or coming out next year or this year, I mean. And basically the colored buttons is they have button prompts in the game, and those button prompts match the colors of like the Super Famicom buttons. And that's because the Switch 2 has colored buttons. And I personally don't see why this is a thing that anyone says at all. Because first of all, if you just, you know, at face value, look at the games that are coming out. Okay, so Super Mario RPG, and usually they'll say, okay, well, it's a Super Nintendo game, and it had those same colored button prompts in the original version. That's a non-factor. Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, you could maybe make that argument, but it also had colored buttons in the GameCube version. And of course, they're going to keep parity with the other games that have colored button prompts, right? Specifically, if it's a Mario RPG, I think it makes sense to keep that colored button prompt. Next, there was like Fashion Dreamer, as well as East 10, I think, and some other ones. But his point is that, or the point of the colored button theory is basically saying that, okay, well, these games, the developers were, you know, shown the dev kit, or they were told about it, and therefore, you know, put these in because the Switch 2 is going to be backward compatible, and if you play this game on the Switch 2, then the button prompts will make sense and will match up with the design of the buttons on the controller. 2 points. First of all, dev kits don't look like the final design. If you remember, the PS5 dev kit did not look at all like the PS5. And even the Nintendo Switch dev kit had black Joy-Cons. And black Joy-Cons still don't exist. This is not the final design that the dev kit is. And that's even assuming that these devs have a dev kit or are told about it. And I don't think even if they were given a dev kit, they would be told the final design for the controller. And my second point is, what about all the games coming out that don't have colored button prompts? Why do these ones that came out last year do, but ones that came out this year don't? How do you explain that? Like, for example, Another Code Recollection, that one doesn't have colored button prompts. Neither does Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. So how do you explain that? And those are first-party games. So if Nintendo was telling people to put these in their games, then why wouldn't they do it themselves as well?
It just doesn't make sense. I can maybe see, okay, for an accessibility thing, that maybe they'll have the colored buttons for the prompts and say, okay, if you're going to do colored buttons, please do it in this way. And then maybe for the same reason, for accessibility, they'll make the Switch 2 have colored buttons. But I don't think they're putting the colored buttons in the games because of the Switch 2. If anything, they're saying, here's an accessibility thing, please do it this way. But you don't have to do it if you don't want to. Because not even Nintendo's doing it for all their games. Only for like 2. Anyway, next point. that was the whole thing. The next point is that they didn't announce new DLC for games that released last year. And I have the game list of the games that came out last year, so let's just go through it. Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, that's a remake. Obviously, having DLC doesn't really make sense. Bayonetta Origins. Bayonetta games have never had DLC, nonetheless a spin-off of Bayonetta. Detective Pikachu Returns, the original one didn't have DLC. Everybody Went to Switch, the original didn't have DLC. Fire Emblem Engage. Fire Emblem Engage did have DLC. Of course, it's DLC for last year, not for this year, but regardless, it had DLC. Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, that's a remaster. Metroid Prime Remastered, that's a remaster. Pikmin 4. Now, Pikmin 4 is an interesting one, because Pikmin 3 did have DLC. I give you that. However, the DLC for Pikmin 4, or for Pikmin 3, was announced in October of 2013. Which, of course, both games released in July, Pikmin 3 and 4. And if they announce the DLC in October of 2013, there hasn't been a direct after that point. So, like, if they say, okay, it's October 1st, 2013, and if you want to match parity with that, that would be October 1st, 2023, for the Pikmin 4 DLC announced. But Nintendo only has directs in September and February and June. So then that means the next direct that they would announce Pikmin 4 DLC would be February. So it hasn't even been announced yet if they are doing it. Now you could argue that maybe they would announce it in September, and maybe that's true. But that would be announcing it earlier than the DLC for Pikmin 3 was announced. That's my point. Next, Super Mario Bros. Wonder. I would argue the same thing. It might be too soon to see DLC for that game. And of course, you know, New Super Mario Bros. You didn't have DLC, but then again, that was a port. New Super Mario Bros. 2 did have DLC, I'll give you that. And so did New Super Mario Bros. U. So, DLC for this game, it's possible. But I would argue that they would announce it in the Direct, which hasn't happened yet. And Tears of the Kingdom, of course, was the only actual weird one, in my opinion, out of this. Because Breath of the Wild had DLC and was a huge success. Tears of the Kingdom, I would argue, well, for that game in particular, it's the last big Zelda game, so they could wait. They could release DLC on the Switch, maybe. And I will admit that's a little bit weird that they didn't. But, you know, who knows? Maybe they're just putting their efforts into the next console, which, of course, I think is his main point. But, yeah, for that one in particular, yes, I will admit that one's a little bit weird. And then, of course, WarioWare Move It, which, as far as I know, WarioWare games have never had DLC, so moot point. Next, he mentions Fantasy Life, which is because it says Nintendo Switch plus undecided systems, and that they have a release date in mind, but for quote-unquote strategic reasons, they're only going to say summer. And I think the reason that, first of all, they don't say the release date, well, first of all, the theory is that they're not saying the release date because that it's coming to Switch 2 and that the release date is a launch title, so it would just leak the release date for the Switch 2. I don't think that's the case. I think the reason they don't say a release date is because they have undecided systems. They hadn't completely decided what systems to put the game on yet. And they're not going to announce a release date unless they also have the system that they're going to put it out on. They haven't decided to put it out on PS4 or yet or whatever. I think it's just at face value, just that's what they're saying. And then that's basically the last point he made in his video. However, I will add this on because this happened a few days ago. There was a Bloomberg report that basically said, okay, well, there's going to be a big upsurge. It's going to be 2 times the amount of LCDs ordered by Nintendo in this fiscal year, the next one coming up, and that basically means 10 million units of something in the first fiscal year of basically Switch 2. And, you know, that's interesting because people a lot are saying, okay, well, this confirms Switch 2 then, right? And the analyst did say that, you know, it was coming out. That would mean that the system's coming out this year, which, that's fine, but like I said, analysts are often wrong. And again, it keeps saying this fiscal year. And you would expect, even if you were to assume that it was coming out in 2024, they would still ramp up into mass production of these units. And this doesn't say units sold. It says units like of the screens, of just the screens, which basically means the part, not the whole console being sold. It just means that Nintendo is buying the parts. And of course, you would expect, even if the console was coming out this year or in March of 2025, that they would put the console into mass production this fiscal year anyway. So it doesn't prove 2024, because it would be going into mass production in 2024 regardless of if it's 2024 or 2025. That's basically my point. And of course, this came out after his video, so I would say he would probably would have put that in, but so I just tacked it on to the end. But basically, that's my point. And like I said, I couldn't make a video about why I think it would be coming out in 2025 instead of 2024. Maybe I'll do that later. But right now, this video was just about all the points supporting 2024 and why, in my opinion, not all of them really make sense or matter. So yeah, and like I said, no shade to Andres Restar. I do enjoy his content. I do recommend you check out his channel. But anyway, that's basically all I have to say. So let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.